Is Project 2025 the answer to taming big tech or just another shot in the dark? Let's dive in and see if we can find out. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number. Today, we're delving back into Project 2025, the sprawling conservative agenda from the Heritage Foundation. If you missed our discussion on the SAVE Act last week, you might want to catch up. This episode is just as packed as we unpick Project 2025 plans for the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC. So here to give us the lowdown, as always, is Sarah.
Hello, everybody.
Just one more time then, why don't you tell us what Project 2025 really is?
Project 2025, or the Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, is like the conservative playbook for a second Trump term. And it's this 800-page document that's just full of policy proposals aimed at overhauling the government. And the plan includes major reforms on four main fronts. And the first is restoring family values, then dismantling the administrative state, defending national sovereignty, and securing individual rights. And basically, this entire project is a roadmap for conservatives to kind of hit the ground running if Trump wins the election. And it's become a major attack line for Democrats in the election. It's obviously surfaced a ton on social media, and it's kind of, taken the presidential debates and the campaign trail and, all these questions by storm. And the Trump campaign is trying to distance themselves and their candidate, Trump, from it. But Paul Dans, the Project 2025 director, has also stepped down to focus on campaigning for Trump full-time. And of course, the selection of J.D. Vance as Trump's running mate didn't really help the argument that the Trump campaign didn't know anything about Project 2025 because he wrote the foreword for the book by one of the principal architects of 2025, Kevin Roberts. It remains a major insight into the conservative thinking that we might see if Trump does win the election and take on the White House.
We have a big issue here that whoever forms the next government, they are going to have to tackle it. Let's turn back to the conservative plan for this from Project 2025. So, tell us then, how does this project plan to tackle big tech through, in particular, the FCC?
Yeah, so Project 2025 has a section of the 800 pages that specifically focuses on the FCC. And this is just one little piece of it. So it's actually one of their first initiatives, but it is how the FCC can play a role in reining in big tech is how they phrase it in their document. And their plan is to target several different areas of what they think is helping big tech kind of be these monopolies, be these really influential forces in our lives where we think that the FCC might be able to kind of put in some regulations and help with this. So the first is reforming Section 230. The second is enforcing transparency rules. And then the third is pushing for more accountability from these tech giants. And they really want to clarify that Section 230 immunity doesn't cover all content decisions and implement some new rules that require these platforms to engage in transparency about how they're moderating content, if they are at all.
So what exactly is Section 230 and what does Project 2022 want to do to change?
So Section 230 was actually created as part of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and it's frequently called the 26 words that made the internet, and it's called that because it essentially is what made it possible to have the internet that we have today. And we can actually read it out because, again, it's just 26 words. So, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by any other information content provider. Essentially, the way that Section 230 lives in our current space, which is not 1996, we're almost 30 years later from when this was originally enacted, is it protects tech platforms from being liable for user-generated content. And I don't think anyone in 1996 could have ever thought of the social media world that we live in today. But Project 2025 really wants to reform this by making it clear that this immunity does not not apply to all content decisions. And they want to create guidelines that outline when these protections are appropriate to apply to big tech, and, you know, kind of anyone who's making something online, and ensure that the platforms aren't using this immunity to avoid responsibility for their moderation practices.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's quite rightly called the 26 words that created the internet, and you mess with this at your peril. So there have been many things proposed over the years for how this could be improved and better reflect the world we live in. But the devil is in the detail, isn't it? So exactly what speech is protected and what isn't. Is it about the politics? Is it about the views? Or is it about obscenity and who gets to define what that obscenity is? So it's a super problematic sort of change to make, and in particular, how are you going to implement it? What exactly effect? What would be the impact of this on all of those sort of tech companies there? So it's it's a sort of an interesting proposal, certainly. So, but what about transparency then? So, how does Project 2025 propose to increase transparency?
Yeah, so Project 2025 is pushing for the FCC to impose new transparency requirements for big tech, and this would essentially mean that mandatory disclosures about how content is moderated in the policy and practice that the company is kind of putting into place. And they want to make sure that platforms are very clear about how they handle content and provide the transparent process for users to appeal the content removal decisions. And so essentially, they want people to write out exactly what the policies are and then give very easy, accessible processes for people to be appealing anything that would be taken off. To your point of what this could mean in practice and who takes on all of this, there is something that is so dangerous here about publishing these types of things that you're not necessarily always thinking of if you're just using the internet, is the ability to reverse engineer. And so when you have these policies and these practices that are published, there is a real attempt by people who are trying to kind of, go after that virality of being incredibly, explicit and out there and whatever for whatever they might be out there. Again, is it right? Is it left? Is it alien abduction? It doesn't quite matter. But if you know the rules that are in place and either the words that are going to get triggered or this and that and the other, you can reverse engineer the way that you put out content to obfuscate these policies and to not get flagged. But your intent is still the intent that they are trying to not have you do. And so, that's one big issue. But also, like everything with this, the devil's in the details. And how are we going to do this? And this is something that, again, seems very sensible from Project 2025 of, yes, the internet is a crazy place. We got to figure out what's going on. Big tech is a huge monopoly and they should be responsible for what they're creating. And they shouldn't just have what Project 25 references as carte blanche ability to just kind of do whatever on the internet. But when we look into how this could be enforced, there are so many issues of what is right, what is wrong, who decides that, what set of values are we ascribing to, does it change country by country? If we're doing that, are we limiting the free flow of information and all these other types of things? There's dangerous content that we can all kind of maybe agree is dangerous of, physical violence. But then when we get into LGBTQ stuff, is it that it's not dangerous because it's a person's ability to live and who they are? Or is it dangerous because your religion makes you feel like it's very dangerous for you to be, exposed to any type of gay love or, conversations about gayness with kids or other things like that. So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It is. And obviously there is a genuine sort of fear within the conservative community that big tech is all very liberal, and that therefore conservative voices are dampened down, that the moderation, either explicitly or implicitly, is stopping them from expressing themselves in the way they should be able to, in a way that doesn't happen for liberals. Now, obviously that's a hugely controversial point of view, but it is the thing that sort of spurred Trump to produce sort of True Social and moves to Telegram and various other sort of organizations like that. So it does make you a little bit suspicious with Project 2025 that basically what they're trying to do here is to sort of try and remove this perceived bias that I've seen a lot of people claim doesn't exist at all, and that it's not really about stopping the truly harmful stuff. It's more about making sure that sort of conservatives can say whatever they like.
Yes, and it's interesting because there's actually a bill that I reference in the blog. It's a Texas bill. It's Texas HB 20. And it was passed back in 2021. It essentially says that social media companies can't remove posts simply because they're the author's opinions. And again, it's one of those things that gets interesting where if you kind of read between the lines, they're saying we don't want people who are under attack, which is the conservative mindset, to be having their posts removed from social media because this is their way of thought. But again, how can you draw the line between something that is somebody's opinion and fact or anything else? Anything could possibly be an opinion, depending how you phrase it, depending on all of these different things. So again, it's one of those things where it's just hard enough, and these things are phrased in just a weird enough way that quite literally done wrong, this could break the internet. This could break how the entire world that we live in as we know it works. And I don't think that this is something that people are really thinking about in the depth that they need to understand these implications.
Absolutely, because it's not just the US, is it? And most policy implications will have most of the impact within the US, because obviously it's the US government. But when it comes to big tech, it's the whole world. The internet for the whole world really is controlled from the US, and all of these big tech companies, virtually all of them, apart from maybe a few big Chinese ones, are US companies. And so whatever happens here sort of impacts us all in all sorts of different countries around the world. It's sort of very interesting proposals.
An interesting thing, there is part of Section 230 that says that users should be able to moderate the content and have those controls within their abilities. And generally, there's kind of stuff like that out there where you can report stuff or flag stuff or hide stuff, so you don't want to receive that type of content anymore. But again, it gets into who has the most influence on a platform, what are the ideas there, what is getting flagged, what isn't getting flagged. And if we could all agree that we're going to be wonderful people and treat each other with kindness and respect, then maybe that would work. But again, it's in the eyes of in the fingers of the controller, eyes of the beholder in the fingers of the controller. I don't know.
They also propose changes to user control and the Universal Service Fund. So what are those changes?
To your point that you just made about how the U.S. is the internet for everywhere, this Universal Service Fund is actually a really interesting part of the Project 2025 proposal, in that this Universal Service Fund is a fund here that helps support rural broadband and low-income internet programs. And so it just helps kind of bring people that might be in the mountains in Montana or the fields of Nebraska online. And most internet companies have to pay into this because they are these platforms that they're benefiting from this fund that is getting internet out to these places. And social media companies do not have to, at this current point in time, give money to these funds. So social media companies are really benefiting from the Universal Service Fund, and they should be paying into it. And also, this fund needs more funding, like everything in the States, but they should be doing that. And so that is an interesting piece of this Project 2025, where this is one of the pieces of it where you're like, yeah, that's easy. How that's going to work, it makes sense. They're benefiting from something that they're not paying into, that other corporations that are similar to them are paying into. But, this user control piece and some of those other pieces, again, we get into the devil's in the details. How are we possibly going to do this?
Yes, it does seem very problematic. I mean, a lot of social media does have elements to it where users are able to moderate, and that can be very effective. If you're allowed to flag something as a worry or just wrong, and just say, I completely disagree with this, but then which user is right, which users' voices are reflected most heavily. It's quite difficult there, because you can have concerted campaigns by certain groups who can get large numbers of people together to say this is wrong when actually it might not be, or it's just a matter of opinion. So again, sort of quite problematic there. So we've spoken quite a lot about this. Are there any other potential risks and drawbacks that we haven't mentioned?
It's also so interesting because, like AI that we've been talking about, like so many other things, it is very hard to fully grasp what's going on here. Even as someone who works in tech myself, and we have had a decent amount of legislation over the years aiming to fix or address Section 230 and how it's being used and better ways that we can move forward. And actually, next week, we'll talk about two bills that are very, very timely for this discussion: the COPA 2.0 Act and the COSA Act. These are bills that just passed through the Senate at the end of July. The way that Project 2025 is kind of laying it out, there's some interesting coincidences about how it could possibly impact Trump's assets, other things like that. And then when we look at what we are actually doing in the legislative world, which Project 2025, is advocating for as part of this, it's very different. At the end of the day, it's just how on earth would we do this? How would we make these decisions? Whose values are right? Whose values are wrong? And it's madness. It's something that takes a lot more thought than the page and a half of the 800 pages of Project 2025 that was given to this idea.
And it's certainly something that needs to be tackled in a sort of a very bipartisan way as well. So it's more worrying, and for either party, actually, either Democrat or Republican Party, to say this is the way to do it. There's going to be some sort of ideology in there. So the eventual plan to fix this needs to be transnational, and it needs to be bipartisan in the US. And it needs to be flexible enough to cope with changes to technology as well. A hugely important challenge facing the whole world that we need to get to grips with. Thanks very much for breaking it all down for us, Sarah. Fascinating. And I would obviously urge anybody to go online to Build Track 50 and read your blog, where there's a lot more detail about this. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe and stay up to date on the latest bills and policies shaping our future. Until next time.
Thanks, everyone.